And welcome to another edition of Krown Countdown, the bravest CFL draft show out there, because we're doing this all before the NFL draft. And of course, we're going to have our experts on the panel as usual. Gord, we've already seen Gord down at the bottom of the screen, but we've also got Justin Dunk in Toronto. So let's get right into the CFL draft discussion. And of course, we're looking at this through the lens of youth sports football, but we've also looked at the NCAA as we've gone through this off-season. This class, Gord, I've got to say, not that impressive. Like, when I've talked to people throughout the Canadian Football League, they're not hyped up about this draft class. They rate it as about a C to a C minus. Is that a fair assessment in your mind?
I think so. I don't think that there is a lot of depth to the class. I think there are some B plus to A type guys near the top, and we also are continuing to see the NFL eating away a little bit at the top end prospects. We now have 5 guys we'll talk about in a little bit that have legitimate NFL aspirations, and that throws a real fork in the draft process and really factors into teams' decision making in that first and then second round process. I also don't think, I mean, it's a lot of trickle down from the NFL, to be honest with you, Jim. The class going into the NFL draft this year is seen as, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, and particularly the offensive line position, is seen as very thin. And in the CFL, where that's one of the biggest non-import positions, we're seeing a lot of that trickle-down effect as well. We are also seeing, with the top prospects in U Sports and the NC2A coming out of a lot of spread systems, a lot of them, we're seeing a bigger transitional phase as well. And I think that that's eating into the evaluation of this class too.
Justin, what sort of mark would you give this draft class overall?
That's tough to say. I usually like to reserve it for a couple of years down the road, but it's definitely not as deep as classes in the past years, especially that double cohort year that was very deep. Right now, I would give it a B. I think there's some interesting prospects in this draft that, with some development in time, could be stars in the CFL, but it certainly lacks the depth. That's the key here.
Justin, what do you think when you take a look at this class in terms of these athletes fitting certain needs for CFL teams at this stage? Is that one of the reasons why this class might be getting knocked around a little bit?
It might be, but I think it's some of those traditional Canadian positions, and we're talking offensive and defensive line right now, that there are some guys to be had in this draft that could help you right away, and some interesting prospects with some development that down the line could play some snaps on the offensive and defensive line. I think there's a good group of top-tier offensive linemen, and there's some defensive linemen that can come in and play some snaps for you right away. Junior Luke out of the University of Montreal pops right to mind from a U Sports perspective. He's a guy that's likely going to be a first-round pick and could make an impact pretty early. And in years past, we've seen a bit of a dearth of defensive linemen, especially on the interior. So that's where I feel like a guy like Luke is going to benefit in this class. Kay Okafor as well from St. FX, and Fabian Foote from McMaster, who had a phenomenal combine. Those are some guys to look for at the D-line position.
In terms of the whole star system, though, this is a draft that's really inverted, and I don't want to knock around the offensive linemen. You're part of that union. What is your take on the offensive line class that we have here?
Well, you have the top end of the offensive line class. A lot of these guys are coming from the United States, and there are guys, Justin Sr. in particular, and Jeff Gray as well, who actually isn't an NC2A guy, but these guys have legitimate NFL aspirations, and they seem to be, I believe, talent-wise, the clear 1-2 in this class. Now, they are not to the level where they're complete slam dunks, to the point where a team would be running to the podium just to get a chance at them a couple of years down the road, but those two guys are the top of this class. They, I don't believe, will be in the CFL right away, which complicates things further. The top guy I think that will end up in the CFL next season is going to be Darius Bladdock, a guy who's a little bit older, a guy who is, we found out was a Canadian pretty late on in the process, but a guy who has basically exhausted his NFL options so far and looks as ready as any in this class.
Justin, what do you think of the asterisk Canadians that we've seen come in to the CFL draft and the CFL after the rule was changed? last year. I also understand that that you just broke a story featuring one of them.
That's right. So Cameron Judge, a linebacker out of UCLA who was born in Canada, has now been put into the CFL draft, and he's going to be a top pick here, guys. Has a chance to go in the first round. As for how I feel about the asterisk Canadian, or some people are calling them fake Canadians around the CFL, I feel like I'm all right with it, because if you can get your Canadian citizenship, be a citizen of this country, that should allow you to play in this league as a Canadian. And I believe that's why the CFL made the rule change back a few years ago to allow that to be the case. So I'm all right with it. There are some people who feel like these guys are, as I said, fake Canadians and maybe should be playing in the CFL as Americans. But at the end of the day, they would be considered a Canadian citizen, so they should be a national in the CFL, in my opinion.
Well, I don't want to plagiarize too much on what I previously said on our radio program in particular, but I completely have a different opinion on that. What is the point of having a national designation in our league? This is a league that's marketed itself as our league, so you want Canadians to be actual Canadians. Nobody growing up in Canada relates to Darius Bladdock, for example, and again, I do not want to make this personal about Darius Bladdock. He's just this year's example, probably the top guy that's going to go in this draft that fits that mold. But he's a guy who never stepped foot in this country prior to the CFL Combine. No fan will relate to that guy and will draw a connection to that guy as a national and likely long-term CFL guy, because it just doesn't exist there. And so that's where this rule needs to be adopted. On the other hand, you can get a guy like G. Roy Simon, plays 12 years in this league, settles down, marries a local resident, has kids here, all those kinds of things, had to play his entire career as an international, or at that point, import designation. Those two things do not line up for me whatsoever, so they need to be addressed by the CFL, in my opinion.
When we return, we will go through the first round of the CFL draft. You're watching Krown Countdown U.
Krown Countdown U is supported by the Guelph Griffins. Agile, mobile, hostile.
Krown Produce secures produce locally and from around the world for Canadian retailers. Krown Produce is also proud to secure sponsorship of University football on Shaw. Krown Produce, supporting Canadian retailers and Canadian amateur football. Now it's time to go through the first round of the CFL draft, and we're doing it before the NFL draft, so a few things might change between now and then. So Winnipeg is the first overall pick. The Bombers are on the clock, and Gord, your pick for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers.
For the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, where they have the most immediate need, in my opinion, is on the defensive line. And the most immediate high-impact defensive line prospect in this draft is Faith Ekakite of Iowa. Iowa, a very strong program in the Big Ten in the NC2A. Ekakite is not really making a lot of buzz on the NFL radar. I think he'll probably get a shot, but I don't think that he'll stick down there. So he's a guy who's got a better chance than the other guy at the top end of this D-line class, which is Eli Anku, of being in the CFL within the next year. And I think Winnipeg needs to get a guy who's going to make an immediate impact. I think they go with Ekakite.
Justin, over to you.
I'm going with the same guy. Bombers take Faith Ekakite, D-lineman, Iowa, for many of the reasons Gord mentioned. I believe he could get an NFL minicamp invite, but there's a pretty decent possibility that he's even playing in the CFL in 2017.
And let's make that 3 for 3. I think we're all on the Ekakite bandwagon for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They have a need there. I think the only knock on Ekakite is that he was a rotation player. He only started 3 times there last year. Now the Saskatchewan Roughriders are on the clock, and I'm going to throw it over to you, Justin.
So for me, if the Riders keep this pick, they need an offensive lineman that can come in and be at camp right now. I don't believe they can afford to take a guy like Jeff Gray, who likely will only play in the NFL or go back to the University of Manitoba for his final season and finish up his engineering degree. So they go Darius Bladdock, offensive lineman. Bethune-Cookman has been through the NFL rigmarole, and I think they get a guy that's going to be in camp and be ready to go fairly soon.
I liked Bladdock in this spot too. I think they've got a year or two left out of Brendan Labatt, who's now 30 years old. I think that they want to see Josiah St. John step in on that offensive line, although they may not be sold on him yet. So I go back over to the other side of the ball again, and I'm going to go with Anku here, a guy who comes out of another big-time program in the United States at UCLA in the Pac-12, a guy who will most likely spend at least a year in the NFL, so you're not going to see him right away. But this is a guy that's got the nasty demeanor that that Chris Jones really likes. And Chris Jones, being a deep South American guy himself, I think will look south of the line, which is one of the reasons why I like Bladdock as well. Same demeanor, same kind of background, but Anku is the fit here, I believe, because I don't believe that they need to address the offensive line right away.
And for many of the reasons that you just mentioned about Chris Jones, I'm on the Darius Bladdock train. I think he goes with the American training on the offensive line. He did it with Josiah St. John last year, and it's a good solution for him. Now up on the clock, the BC Lions with the number 3 pick, and I'm going to throw it right back to you, Gord.
Well, I'm probably going to change this opinion later on, but before that Judge news dropped that we literally just heard as we were about to take air, I said there was one certainty with the BC Lions, in my opinion. It was that with the 2 first-round picks they have, they would choose offensive line and receiver in either order. The way I have it falling, I have them taking Nate Behar here out of Carleton. They had Sean Gore retire this past offseason, and Nate Behar is as close to a Sean Gore clone as you will find in this draft. Ran a 4.6 flat at the Combine, the fastest time amongst receivers. He's a similar build, a little bit undersized, but a guy who loves the game. I know there were some mixed reviews about how he came across in interviews, but I think the Lions will love his explosiveness and his knack for the big play, and they need to replace Sean Gore in some way, shape, or form. Behar's the pick for the Lions here.
Hold on 1 second while I just pick my job off the floor. I'll bet you, Gord, if Nate Behar goes 3rd overall, a nice frosty beverage the next time you're in Toronto or I'm out in BC, because I don't think he's going that high. Great player, high caliber guy, but are you in for the bet?
You can't all pick the same guy every pick, so.
We got to switch it up a little bit, but the bet's on for frosty beverage. Anyways, my pick at number 3 overall for the BC Lions is going to be Junior Luke, the defensive lineman out of Montreal. Starts the D-line flowing in my mock, at least a guy that they know they're going to get right away. They lost Jabbar Westerman, a national defensive lineman in free agency, who signed with the Montreal Alouettes. And I'm not sure that Luke will be around with their 2nd first-round pick, so they grab him at number 3 overall.
Well, there is an outside chance that the Winnipeg Blue Bombers could select Junior Luke, but I have him going in this spot as well, and I want to disagree with our friend over in Toronto at some point in time because I do want to collect some free beer off of him, but that's the way it goes. The 4th overall pick to the Hamilton Tiger Cats, I'm going with peer pressure here, and I'm going with the best receiver at the Combine for the Ticats. That would be Danny VANDERVOORT, because VANDERVOORT is a local guy, he's a hometown guy, but he also showed that as for the receivers this year, he's the complete package, and they also have an aging Andy Fantus in that position.
An aging Andy Fantus whose season was cut short by injury at the end of last year as well. VANDERVOORT's my pick here as well. I believe that the Lions will pick their preference of those 2 wide receivers with that pick, and I think that they decide on Behar. VANDERVOORT's the guy that falls to the Ticats. I think the Ticats probably value him higher, particularly with the Stefan Potasic connection. This is a connection that Marshall Ferguson made in one of his mock drafts, which, by the way, are fantastic, and I agree with that logic. It's sound logic. I see VANDERVOORT here.
The 4th pick is very interesting, and I feel like it'll be a pivotal pick in this first round. Hamilton has created a lot of ratio options and couldn't go a number of different ways. They have Justin Capacati at defensive end, although they have Adrian Tracy and John Chick, who are probably 2 of the best in the CFL as Americans. Could they look at linebacker? Frederick Plessius was traded to Montreal for Nick Shorthill, who comes back, who a lot of people believe could be a starter in this league. Craig Butler is going to be back from injury. He's likely going to play this season. And Courtney Stephen is going to play at safety. Even he could play at field corner. They did want to try to play 4 Canadian offensive linemen until Matthew Girard retired. So I feel like that's the position they go to. The question is, Who do they pick? Do they take a chance on Mason Woods, who is high on potential but is from BC and could maybe leave? I'm going to say so for the purposes of this mock. Mason Woods to the Ticats.
Interesting pick. Let's take a look at the Edmonton Eskimos now, who are next up on the clock. Your thoughts, Gord?
Sure. I'm going to go with Justin Senior here. Now, he's a guy that Edmonton's going to have to wait on, and to be honest, he's a guy that may never actually see the CFL, and that might scare the Eskimos away. But Justin Senior reminds me a lot of a couple of Eskimos in Matt O'Donnell and Justin Sorensen, who are currently on their offensive line. Both those guys took a couple years to kind of find their footing, came out of college as pure tackles, and ended up transitioning inside to the CFL as long guys that kind of look like tackles but made the adjustment. Sorensen in particular is an SEC guy that knows a lot about the transition from that conference up here and would have a lot of wisdom to share with a guy like Justin Senior if and when he arrives in Edmonton. The big asterisk being, I don't know if his legitimate NFL interest, and he's probably going to go mid-rounds in the NFL, so he'll see a couple years down there. I don't know if that's going to scare Edmonton away under their new management.
As you mentioned, Gord, the new management over there will be interesting to see how Brock Sunderland conducts his first draft as a GM. He comes from a Red Blacks team that was largely built Canadian-wise strongly along that offensive line, and my pick is going to go back to that position. Justin Sorensen has been a warrior for that team up front, getting a little long in the tooth, getting up there in age, and there are scouts around the league who see Jean-Simon Roy as a better center probably than the position he played at Laval as a tackle. He probably will never play tackle in the CFL. So I think they had success taking Danny Grew in the first round a couple of years ago. They get a guy that they can groom, that they know will be there this year, and take Jean-Simon Roy.
I'm kind of juggling Gray and Senior at this spot, and the problem for the Edmonton Eskimos and the problem for Ed Hervey is that he picked 4 first-rounders that didn't amount to anything. Now Ed Hervey isn't with the Eskimos. So I'm going a little off track here, and I'm going with Braden Schramm, the offensive lineman out of the Calgary Dinos program. Am I going a little too far off the res here?
I think your thought process is sound. I don't know that he would be the guy that I would fit in here quite yet, but I think your thought process is sound on that, yeah.
The next pick is the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and Justin, you're up.
For me, this is where Jeff Gray comes off the board. This is sort of a bonus pick for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They get their defensive lineman at number 1 overall in Kakati, who we all had going there. And then they're able to take Gray, who, if he doesn't make an NFL roster this season, could possibly play for the Bombers because he could still go to the University of Manitoba and take his classes and play for Winnipeg. So Jeff Gray comes off the board at number 6 for me.
Well, it looks like we're all going with the Bombers' dream scenario here. I have Jeff Gray falling to them at 6. I'm going to refer back to Marshall Ferguson's mock draft again. He actually had them taking Jeff Gray at number 1 overall because he didn't feel like they wanted to let him get out of Winnipeg. I think they have him fall to them at 6, and I think they're ecstatic with that result. I do believe he's going to see a full year down south or at school. I know that some CFL teams see his commitment to academics as a drawback, a negative. I think they should be seeing it on the other end of the spectrum because you look at some recent examples, Brett Jones being one and Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. Those are 2 guys who were academic first guys that went back to school, made sure they finished their schooling, and both of them are now starting in the NFL. Didn't seem to hold them back too much, and Brett Jones put in an all-Canadian year before he left. So I think that Winnipeg would be ecstatic with Jeff Gray here. He's a great fit.
And for me, Jeff Gray as well. That allows us to jump to the next pick, which are the BC Lions. And on my list, I've got the new addition here, a bunch of scribbles on the list, Cameron Judge from UCLA, who's just been added to the CFL draft list. Are you on board with that one?
Cameron Judge is absolutely a possibility at each of these next 3 picks. The Lions lost Boseko Lokombo in the offseason. They also lost Adam Bighill, though he's an international. They lost him as well. So the linebacking core could use some reserves. They may fall in love with Cameron Judge's athleticism. He's a guy who's got some explosiveness. However, I said off the top, it's going to be wide receiver, offensive line for the Lions here. They have not picked offensive line yet for me. Here's where they get Darius Bladdock, and I think they're ecstatic. On the offensive line, they've got Hunter Stewart, who's a guy who has yet to play a full, healthy CFL year. Also may have some NFL aspirations coming around the corner as well. They've also got Cody Husband, who's a guy that is starting to get up there a little bit. He's pushing 30. They made something out of him at center. One of those weird 6'8" centers that seem to be a thing in the West in the CFL. But they are also trying to go with 4 offensive linemen this year with the David Foucault deal that they brought in. I think that they need an offensive lineman out of these first 2 picks. Darius Bladdock's their guy.
For me, this becomes interesting with the addition of Cameron Judge, as you guys mentioned. And in my mock, I had them taking Junior Luke at number 3 overall, so they get that defensive lineman. Now it's 7 with the addition of Judge. Do they go that way, get an ultra-athletic linebacker who will be an immediate help on special teams and could possibly start down the line? And you guys mentioned it, the loss of Bo Lacumbo, the national linebacker, hurts them a little bit on special teams, and they viewed him as a guy that was potentially going to take over or at least battle for the job that Adam Bighill left when he signed with the New Orleans Saints. So do they go linebacker or do they go offensive line and look for another guy to put in the pipeline and develop potentially as a tackle in Jeremy Zver out of the University of Regina, 2-sport athlete, basketball and football, convert out of the gym for his size. But I feel like BC might think they can get another offensive lineman later, and Cameron Judge is certainly not going to be available in the 2nd round. So Judge is my pick for the Lions at 7.
Next up, the Grey Cup runner-up, the Calgary Stampeders, and we will go back to Toronto and Justin for his pick.
I'll try to be a little more concise. I'll go Justin Vaughn, the defensive tackle out of Fordham. Had a good senior season, can provide pass rush from the interior of the defensive line, and Junior Turner is going to be out for most of the year with an ACL injury. So Justin Vaughn, Calgary at number 8.
I don't know, maybe my Canada West card is showing a little bit here, but I've got a former Defensive Player of the Year, halfback Robert Woodson. His stats didn't pile up that much last year because no one wanted to go in the direction of him and Adam Lorentz.
He's also a guy that has had some injury issues within the last 2 years as well, but I agree with you, Jim. I think they keep it in the family. They've already got his older brother Anthony in the fold. Woodson's from a football family. He's got great instincts, and I think that he, like I said off the top, is a guy that's flying under the radar a little bit, who's a bona fide first-round pick. I think Calgary is a very good home for him.
Number 9 on the list to wind up the first round, the defending Grey Cup champion, Ottawa Red Blacks. Back to you.
Here's where I have Cameron Judge going. I had Braden Schramm at this spot. John Gott's getting a little long in the tooth. He's now 31 years old. They need to think about the next guy up after he goes eventually. But I think that they love Cameron Judge here. They're in pretty good shape in most of the Canadian spots, and Judge will be an immediate impact guy, as we said earlier at the BC pick.
Offensive line could certainly be in play here for the Red Blacks. Kadar Spooner, very physical, out of McGill. That's how Brian Chew likes him. But I think where they go here is Eli Anku, the defensive lineman out of UCLA. They're picking 9th overall, can take a little bit of a risk. This guy is very athletic for his size, verted over 30 inches, and he's over 300 pounds, guys. That's pretty darn impressive. So even though they might not get him this year or in a couple of years, it could be worth the pick because he'll be a starter in this league once he gets here.
Okay, so I have Eli Anku written down here, but because I don't want to agree with Duncan, I want to mention this kid's name. I'm going to go with Kadar Spooner out of McGill because he had an outstanding combine from what I managed to see of the CFL combine. He's physically impressive. I like what he brings, and you can never have too many offensive linemen when it comes to your first round in the CFL draft. We go now to pick number 10. Which would be the first of the second round, and that would be the Toronto Argonauts. And they didn't have a pick in the first round. They traded it to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Your thoughts on the Argos picking at the beginning of the second round?
You know, the Argos are a tough pick for me because they are okay in a lot of Canadian spots. They took Brian Jones in the first round last year as a receiver. I think they've got high hopes for him. I have Dondre Wright going here, the DB from Henderson State. Again, off the top, I said that I thought the 2 DBs at the top of this class were being undervalued in this draft. I like Dondre Wright a lot, and I think that he fits in pretty well to that Argonauts secondary.
Man, agreeing kind of makes this show boring, but I was going to go Dondre Wright for a couple reasons. First of all, his special teams impact, going to be able to do that for you right away. They've lost some core teamers there, including Thomas Miles, who was released and quickly signed with Winnipeg. And Jermaine Gabriel hasn't been as durable as he was earlier in his career. Dondre Wright could back up there, provide some depth. So I think that makes a ton of sense, although I feel like there's a chance where, at least on my board, the Argos could look to go receiver and really make that a Canadian position. They did draft Brian Jones and have Levi Noel there last year as well, but maybe get another stud in Danny VANDERVOORT. But I'll go with Dondre Wright to the Argos at 10.
And if they pick a receiver, this is where Nate Behar goes, I think. I think he's got the right personality that probably came through in interviews. They want to sell football in Toronto. He's an Ontario native. He's a big play guy. He's the type of guy that would fit very well with what the Argos are trying to achieve in the GTA. Well, let's take a look at the boards with our various picks. There's a lot of agreeing when you take a look at Gord's board, and then you take a look at Justin's board, and even if you take a look at my board, why do we agree so much?
Well, yeah, if Dunk keeps putting beers on the line, I'll agree with whatever he says. I think that there's a bit of a gap here, and the fits kind of limit us down. I think that there were about 12 guys going into the combine that we could see possibly going in the first round. And let's be clear here. This is not a clear-cut 9, but it just, the fits kind of limit it down. It looks like there's a couple of options for each team from each side. I know that Dunk, before we shot this show, was talking about Mason Woods in the first round. I don't think he's a first-round pick at all. And so he fell out. He ended up falling out for all three of us. I mean, I don't know. We're similar-minded people, I guess. I don't know what to tell you.
I'll put a beer on Mason Woods going in the first round.
I think a team will highly regret that pick if he goes in the first round. I came away thoroughly unimpressed watching not only his combine film, but his college film as well.
Agreed with you on that one. Coming up this week on TSN Radio, we have Farhan Lalji on from TSN to talk about the CFL draft, amongst others, and Mike Hogan will join me on the show. But for now, everyone, let's get out to the draft.